High dollar payouts, homes held hostage. This is impacting sales and rental prices across the District of Columbia. And the News 4 I-Team has uncovered loopholes in an old D.C. law that is now being exploited for profit.
Investigative reporter Jodie Fleischer shows us why experts say it's driving up the housing costs for the rest of us.
Whether you're a homeowner or a renter, a buyer or a seller, you need to know about TOPA.
Anywhere in the city can be impacted by TOPA.
All you need to do is live in a DC rental that's going up for sale.
I've heard of payments of tens of thousands of dollars.
Enacted in 1980, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act was designed to keep longtime renters from being forced out of gentrifying neighborhoods or to help them afford a new lease in a different building. It basically gives renters the chance to buy their place first, but the News 4 I-Team found even when they don't want to or can't afford to buy, they can rake in big bucks by selling those rights.
How can you not love a red door?
Meet Clara, a first-time homebuyer who fell in love with this Capitol Hill row house. It needed major work, but came complete with stained glass windows, a cute little yard, and a renter living in the basement.
And we kept being told, oh, don't worry about it.
The sellers had been asking for the renter to sign a TOPA waiver since they first accepted Clara's offer.
They were offering her $10,000 to sign the waiver, and so we felt like, you know, who wouldn't take that kind of a deal?
Well, it turns out the renter got an even better deal by selling her TOPA rights to someone else, a higher bidder. The day before Clara was set to close, that bidder got to buy the house instead.
I mean, it was really frustrating. I had a legal agreement with the seller to buy the place, and I felt like it was kind of being ripped out from under my feet.
Tenants have now become more savvy about taking advantage of the letter of the law.
DC Realtors Association President Colin Johnson says it's happening more and more. Buyers and sellers forced to pay renters to keep them from using TOPA to hold up a sale.
I've heard payoffs as high as $50,000 to $100,000, depending on what the circumstances are. And that's for single-family homes.
The News 4 I-Team found your name doesn't even have to be on the lease to get paid because DC's TOPA law doesn't define what a tenant is.
If you had your live-in significant other consider this property their home, they're also a tenant.
So a healthcare worker who cared for grandma for a few weeks, the summer intern who rented a room in your house, even a squatter can stop your sale until you pay. Real estate attorney Joy Siegel says she's seen payouts long after leases were up and tenants had left.
The title insurer required us to contact everyone within the last 12 months. Some people had already moved out of the country.
But renters still occupying the home while it's on the market are in the power position.
They can post it online and say, hey, anybody want to buy my row house that I live in? I have the right to assign this to someone else.
It felt like she had me hostage.
While TOPA was passed to keep people from being booted from their homes, Clara says she was allowing the renter in this row house to stay. But in the end, the renter forced Clara to leave instead.
I was up for collaborating with her, but instead what I got back was, what's your best offer?
Now, with a law that's been around for more than 35 years, we asked what's driving these huge payouts now, just within the last few years. We found a whole industry of TOPA chasers, folks targeting renters for a portion of their payout.
TOPA's huge right now, and I would estimate that it's essentially about a $100 million a year industry that is virtually untapped.
This attorney says getting renters the most money for their TOPA rights is now his entire practice. He has a TOPA mobile. He's even trademarked the phrase, got TOPA. Now, coming up tonight at 11, you'll meet him and see how he's driving this booming new industry.
I hear of guns getting stolen all the time.
Police say that's exactly what this crew of gun thieves was trying to do this past March in Fredericksburg.
They were able to breach this door with a crowbar and breach the glass.
But they did not get inside Kurt Sebastian's SSG Tactical.
With the cage, the way we've designed it, they just couldn't break through it.
Just 3 days earlier, they did get inside 50 West Armory in Chantilly.
They basically smashed the first 3 cases. They took what was closest to the door.
35 guns gone in less than a minute. The thieves eventually got caught, but almost all of those guns are still on the street. Once they're out there in the wrong hands, how hard is it to get them back?
Very hard. We essentially have to wait for a crime to occur.
The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms says the problem of stolen guns is growing.
It's on the upward trend. in most every city here in the United States, and I think we have our work cut out for us.
So the News 4 I-Team requested data from the largest local departments in the district, Maryland and Virginia, and crunched the numbers. We found nearly 5,000 guns reported stolen in the last 5 years. During the same time, those same departments recovered more than 10,000 guns.
The impact is quite clear. It's devastating.
We found at least 60 local guns reported stolen in one jurisdiction that turned up in another. Some even traveled across the country. One gun stolen in Fairfax County was found in Austin, Texas. One from Prince William found in Missouri. A gun traveled from Atlanta to D.C. and another from Charlotte to Alexandria.
I have a firearm trace I need assistance with.
When an officer finds a gun on a suspect or at a scene, the ATF's National Trace Center calls the original gun dealer to find out who was the first to buy it. That gives officers a starting point. Then they go to the next buyer and the next in hopes of ending up at their criminal. The ATF traced nearly 20,000 guns for officers in D.C., Maryland, and Virginia last year alone. But those traces are impossible without this.
So that's the official serial number.
Kurt says every gun owner should record serial numbers in a safe place for insurance purposes and to be able to get your guns back if they're stolen.
There's 1,000 reasons on top of the criminal aspect of it that you need to know what your guns are and record those serial numbers.
But of the stolen gun reports the I-Team reviewed, nearly 2,000 had no serial number listed, meaning either the owner didn't know it or the officers didn't enter it. The ATF says both are critical and that every missing gun should be reported to law enforcement immediately.
We don't care how many guns you have or where they are. What we do care about is public safety.
Which is why this group was such a concern. The ATF named them the blowtorch crew for obvious reasons.
Very brazen, very reckless, and it's pretty scary.
They also used sledgehammers and rocks to bust their way into more than a dozen stores across the Carolinas and Georgia, some more than once. They stole 340 guns. Only 87 have been found, most during new crimes. Even here in the district, one gun was used in at least 2 shootings, including a woman's murder. When thieves hit this gun store in Montgomery County in March, you can hear them smashing the glass cases and stealing dozens of guns, some right off the wall, in just 90 seconds.
Just basically lock up your firearms at the end of the night. You don't see jewelry stores at night leave their jewels out in the open.
Kurt says that would be impossible for a store with this many guns, but it's the reason he has a steel cage, an alarm, cameras, even motion sensors in his ceiling. A gun from the burglary crew he kept out of his store in March was found at a Prince George's murder scene this summer.
Well, I wouldn't want to live with myself if this stuff got in the wrong hands.
There is federal legislation pending to toughen penalties for those who steal from gun stores. The owner of that Montgomery County store told me police have made arrests and he has made extensive security upgrades, basically turning his whole store into a vault. Now, stores are required to report stolen guns to the ATF. As for regular gun owners, D.C. and Maryland have mandatory reporting, but Virginia does not.
We're talking about fires at large apartment buildings while they're under construction. Fire chiefs around the country say the buildings are getting bigger and bigger and that the protections that are supposed to be in place to allow that really aren't there until renters are ready to move in.
The 5-alarm fire drew hundreds of firefighters from across the region.
Truck 814, truck 812.
Thick smoke evacuated neighbors and even shut down classes at nearby University of Maryland.
I came out of my office and could see that the building was on fire from 2 blocks away. This isn't going to be good.
That's because College Park Fire Chief Bill Corrigan has seen this fire before in Montgomery County in 2014, in Raleigh and Kansas City in March.
Since we've had ours, I mean, there's been one in Boston, there's been one in Oakland. It's getting to be a once every couple week occurrence somewhere.
Anything over 5 stories used to be considered a high-rise with strict requirements for steel and concrete construction and a more robust sprinkler system. But trade-offs in the code have allowed residential wooden buildings to climb taller and taller. In most places, they can be 5 stories of wood on top of a cement and steel base.
This building was 100% within the allowable parameters, but it was built to the absolute max. I mean, probably to within fractions of an inch.
But he says that means fires like this one can actually be 6 or 7 stories off the ground. He says lightweight wooden construction is more flammable than the traditional masonry style Plus, the Fuse 47 apartments were built into a hill with no access for firefighters to get behind the building. And when firefighters hooked up to the standpipes, the internal water supply designed for firefighting, it took more than an hour to realize the new building's valves were left closed.
So when we pumped in through the fire department connection in the front of the building, the water wasn't going anywhere.
News 4 reached out to the builder, but repeated calls were not returned. The fire sprinkler system had already been installed, but the current code does not require it to be turned on during construction.
This would have been a one sprinkler head fire, and the next day nobody would even have been talking about this incident.
Instead, it was still smoldering, just like the battle sparked by all of these fires to get the codes changed.
When they're under construction, they're particularly vulnerable. So for firefighters, that's a very dangerous time.
Hagerstown Chief Steve Lohr was in charge of the Montgomery County Fire Department when this blaze tore through the Gables Upper Rock apartments while under construction in Rockville.
We had sections of the roof falling off of that building.
He says fire trucks couldn't get behind that building either, and the fire sprinklers were slated to have been turned on the next day.
Every second that passes, the fire is growing.
The Montgomery County Fire Department immediately pushed to change local codes. Current Chief Scott Goldstein says now new wooden buildings can be 5 stories total, and firefighters have to have a path around the structure.
We did make those adjustments, and I would not be surprised if Prince George's County works on, some refinements.
Fire officials tried to address the issues statewide, but failed in the legislature the past 2 years.
I think there's great opposition. I think that the bill asks for too much, and I think that's what hurt us.
Maryland's fire marshal says those opponents vigorously defended the more affordable style of construction, saying when existing codes are followed, the buildings are safe. In a statement to the News 4 I-Team, the American Wood Council said in part, the intent of the recent Maryland legislation was not clear, and as a result imposed unrealistic requirements on both existing and new construction. The requirements were expensive and of uncertain benefit.
Let's get people with a vested interest in this into the same place that we can sit down and propose reasonable solutions.
The larger jurisdictions that can do something on the local level ought to be squarely looking at that and making those changes.
The College Park chief says he plans to approach Prince George's County leaders when his investigation is complete.
It's not just a local problem to us. I mean, we have the ability, hopefully, to maybe be trendsetters.
The chiefs all told me they'd like to see fire sprinkler systems turned on as soon as they're installed and tested, instead of waiting for residents to move in. That could protect these buildings during construction. The College Park chief said investigators may never know what sparked the April fire, but they believe it was accidental.
We heard it was happening, but now we've got the numbers to prove the impact. Records show from January to July of this year, immigration judges from around the country were forced to postpone nearly 25,000 cases because the judges weren't in their courtrooms to hear them.
I think it's a misuse of resources.
Retired immigration judge Paul Wickham Schmidt says he's glad he left the bench last year because it allows him to speak freely about what he's seeing in the court system today.
It's a disaster. I think it's moving toward implosion.
He doesn't mince words when directing his barbs at current immigration policies and the shift in which types of cases are now a priority.
They're trying to detain everybody who arrives, so they've assigned more judges to the southern border, and those judges leave behind full dockets.
The News 4 I-Team learned in the first 7 months of this year, judges from around the country spent weeks away from their home court. Records show more than 200 reassignments, and even more are scheduled later this year. Here in Arlington, we counted at least 15 reassignments, and while they were gone, those judges had to postpone more than 2,500 local cases. Only LA, New York, and Miami had more.
But since most judges are backed up for years, it's not like they move them to next week. They move them to slots 3-4 years down the road.
The Arlington court is already scheduling cases for December of 2021. That's the second longest delay in the nation. In May alone, 5 of the 7 Arlington judges had weeks of reassignment to the border. Records show 946 cases delayed as a result.
When you can't give people hearing dates which they can count on, then as a judge, I feel you lose credibility.
He says to make matters worse, while the judges are reassigned, they can't even work on cases back here at home remotely because the case files are all on paper, not electronic. And he says at the border, many of those folks have just arrived in the U.S. and haven't even had a chance to get an attorney yet. So those cases ultimately have to be delayed as well. Jodie Fleischer, News 4 I-Team.